I'm Stacy Grinsfelder from Blake Hill House, and I am the host of True Tales from Old Houses. Hello, everyone. Guess what? True Tales from Old Houses has hit a milestone. Right now, you are listening to the 50th episode of the show, and I can hardly believe it. Thank you for all the downloads, donations, ratings, reviews, and shares, and I love getting your messages of support and your suggestions, too. I'll be honest, many self-produced podcasts start with someone who knows about their subject and who has a whole lot of heart. But the tech side, well, that's a bit of a dumpster fire. And I would say that is certainly true of True Tales from Old Houses. So thank you for listening, even when the editing was choppy and the sound quality needed some serious help. If you were one of our early guests, a special thank you goes out to you. I remember during the first season, I was chatting with Joe Hayes from Hayes Window Restoration in Minneapolis. We talked for an hour, and then I discovered that my recording device didn't save any of it. Fun fact, that is a podcaster's worst nightmare, as you can imagine. Well, Joe was so gracious about the whole thing. At a later time, we re-recorded, and his interview became episode number 6, titled Lead Safety and Regional Differences in Old Windows. Anyway, I think you're going to enjoy today's 50th episode. I went on location again and met small-town historian Robert Goller, which we'll get to. But first, announcements. I don't have any new announcements this week. It seems like a lot of organizations are still between a rock and a hard place when it comes to scheduling in-person events. It's difficult to predict if those gatherings will be allowed, and if so, how large. So I'm noticing that virtual events are still pretty popular. If you are part of an organization that's hosting an event that is relevant to our listeners, then do please reach out to me through the True Tales from Old Houses website, because I would be happy to announce your event on an upcoming episode. We have an interesting question for Q&A. Today, I welcome back Bill Chapman from Enon Hall. Hi, Bill.
Hey, Stacy. How are you?
Great. Are you ready to answer today's question with me, Bill?
I am.
All right. The question from our listener is, how do you fight old house anxiety? And the example this person used was, for instance, you hear a random noise and stay up at night thinking about the house collapsing.
Oh, wow. Boy, I tell you, my first instance of old house anxiety, and I can say I've had very few anxiety attacks in my life, maybe 2 or 3. The first one was the first night in our 1922 brick Victorian, the first house that we bought as a married couple. And it was, move-in day. It was the first time we'd seen it without the previous owner's furniture in there. So you saw all the cracks in the plaster. I saw a place where I could actually push the drywall in and out. And in the middle of the night was just a massive panic attack. And now we call that 1922 house, we refer to that as a new house compared to our 18th, 19th century house. I think the number one way of combating that kind of anxiety is just knowledge and experience and understanding that a lot about a house is pretty simple and straightforward. And my anxiety that night came from I had no experience. I had no idea whether these were massive problems or cosmetic problems. How about you?
Mm-hmm.
Any anxiety at Blake Hill House?
Oh, we have lots of anxiety at Blake Hill House. No, actually, I'm sorry. I'm kind of chuckling to myself because we do. And I want to start my answer by saying that I am not a therapist. I have no training as a therapist. But because I have somebody very near and dear to me in my immediate family who has a very severe anxiety disorder, I have been involved in a lot of therapy, group therapy, family therapy, individual therapy to help my person in my family deal with and understand this anxiety. So with that, I mean, there's sort of general anxiety in which we all kind of worry, but this to me sounds like it's not debilitating. I mean, this person is getting out of their house on a daily basis, but it's a lot. You're starting to worry to the point where it's disrupting your sleep, and so I would like to say some of the methods that I learned would be number one, you're going to feel that anxiety and you just have to kind of sit with it and feel it and know that it's unpleasant, but not to necessarily push it away. So let's say you're in the middle of the night and you hear this random noise and you stay up, your mind immediately just starts the what ifs, the what ifs, the what ifs. And probably the best solution that we came up with that we learned was to go ahead and follow all those what ifs as far as you can take them, which seems counterintuitive because you think, oh, I don't want to think about that. I don't want to think about all the terrible things that will happen. But let's say you hear a random noise and you stay up thinking about the house collapsing. So you're like, why do I hear that noise? It's because the house is settling. Well, what if there's a crack in my foundation? And then the answer is, well, I will call a foundation expert and they'll come over and they'll tell me whether there's a crack in my basement. Well, what if that crack is going to cost $10,000 and I don't have it? Well, I will go to the bank and I will get a construction loan and that will give me the money that I need to pay to get this foundation fixed. Well, what if they won't give me a loan? Then I'll go to another bank and look for another loan because there are lots of banks in the country and surely someone will offer me money, will loan money to me to fix this crack. And you follow it all the way through until eventually you might even get to the point, what if my house falls down? Well, I'll move. I'll go somewhere else. What if I'll go to an apartment? I'll go live with my mother. There's always something that you can do. I mean, there are very few instances in which there's absolutely the end result is, well, I'll die. It's probably not going to do that.
I like that. So you're gaming out all the options, or you're gaming out all the scenarios to show that you have options.
Yes. And I think that comes a lot maybe with the planning. You said you like to plan. If I get stuck, I find out a solution to my problem and plan to fix it. And it's kind of a lot like that. Make the plan. Here's what I'm going to do if something like this happens. Now, as far as nighttime goes, maybe this person would benefit from trying this exercise in the daytime. Maybe it would be good to just set aside some time and just write out these what ifs. And if that scenario is taken care of during the day, then maybe, hopefully, it won't come knocking at nighttime. That's my suggestion.
I like that. That's smart. Yeah, and all those creaks and groans and noises, they're all louder at night, too.
Oh, they are. They are. And sometimes it's a result of stress, too. So, you might have stress unrelated to the house, but then all of a sudden it comes, tapping at your shoulder at night. You realize, oh, I'm waking up a lot at night, or this is happening a lot at night. And it's based on something completely external, but your brain likes to sort that stuff out at inopportune times.
I feel like I should be paying for this therapy session. This is valuable. I like it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I guess I should repeat at the end here that I'm not a therapist. I'm not paid for this, but yes, by all means, pay me the 5 cents like Lucy from the Peanuts comment or comics,
absolutely.
Right?
That's right.
All right. Yeah. What do you think? I mean, is there anything that's been stressful or anxiety producing in the house that you're living in right now?
Water stresses me out. We had a toilet that the seal broke on it, which led to a roof dropping in the parlor. But that was a room that all the original plaster was gone, and we were going to take down the drywall anyway. So it wound up kicking off a great project. But anytime we have nor'easters or hurricanes and that horizontal wind, that stresses me out because water is just so hard to chase down.
It is. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But I like your process. I will follow that through next time.
Well, good luck. Good luck to the person who asked this question
Absolutely.
too. And hopefully it might help other listeners too. So thank you very much for coming back and talking about anxiety.
Thanks, Stacy.
All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Now it is your turn. This season, I have a question for you as a listener, and it is, what is the weirdest or most surprising thing you ever found in your old house? People seem to really be warming up to this question, and I'm getting more answers. I have 4 to share with you today. The first is from Nora. She sent a message from Westmont, New Jersey. She and her husband found an old Pennant brand metal peanut can incorporated into the ductwork of their home. It looks like a previous owner had just cut off both ends and used it to connect an air return to the primary ductwork. I thought that was pretty resourceful. Now, Betsy from Washington, D.C. has a huge locked wooden chest in her basement left by the previous owner. And here's the kicker. She hasn't opened it yet. Betsy, if I don't hear about the contents of the trunk soon, I'm going to load up some crowbars into my car, I'm going to drive to your house, and I am going to open it for you. I am so curious about what's inside. My friend John Rogers from Phoenix Preservation in St. Joseph, Missouri, said that a 1920 Plumbers Union card fell out of the wall in the basement. Now, the way I understood this was that 1920 was the year the house had its only remodel. So first, one remodel in 100 years, that is impressive. And second, that poor plumber. I wonder if he looked for that card for weeks, wondering how it disappeared. Of course, it is possible that he saw it fall into the void and thought, well, that's gone forever. At this point, I guess we have no idea what the real story is. And finally, Laura volunteers for a nonprofit architectural salvage, and I'm going to read her answer word for word. She wrote, "We found burned Confederate money stuffed inside a Stoddard Square piano in an antebellum house in Vance County, North Carolina." When I read that, I thought, whoa, there is definitely a story there for sure. And it is too bad that we'll never know it. Both Nora and Laura have sent photos, and I've put them over on the show notes if you would like to take a look. Now, I want to hear your answers all season, so please visit the True Tales from Old Houses website. And on the bottom right-hand side, you'll see there is a little microphone icon. It's blue. Click on that little microphone, and you can leave your answer as a voicemail. Please answer in a complete sentence. Now, you can leave the voicemail using your phone or even a computer, just as long as it has a mic. That's really all you need. I have noticed that most of you are pretty shy about leaving voicemails, so please feel free to submit your answer via the contact form instead. I get it. Your privacy is important, and I will not share your messages without your permission. Thank you, Nora, Betsy, John, and Laura for taking the time to answer the question about the weirdest or most surprising thing you ever found in your old house. Earlier, I mentioned that I went on location to interview this week's guest, town historian Robert Goller. What a delightful person. Robert communicates and documents the complexities of small-town history with such sensitivity and grace. I learned a lot during our conversation, and I hope you will too.
I'm Robert Goller. I'm the town historian, village historian as well, here in the town of Aurora and village of East Aurora.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sitting down with me and talking about your job and East Aurora and Aurora.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's the best job in the world. For me, it is, at least.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Well, we tried to get together, I guess, last fall. And when Devin was still my co-host, we had some plans to meet. And it just, well, as you know, as everybody knows, most things fell apart in 2020. And so it's really kind of the highlight of my season this year to get to come and visit with you in person. I love to go on location, and I have some connections to you, so it's really fun. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. And yeah, we're excited to have you here finally, because we actually, in the middle of all of the COVID, we closed. We couldn't be open to the public. And we also moved the entire museum and archives during that period of time as well. So you're back at a good time.
Good. Well, it's exciting for me to see the new building. And that's a good point, because how long had you been in that old building?
We were actually there since 2012, so about 5 years that would be, right? And we had actually moved there from the old Roycroft Chapel here in East Aurora, which was a great building, but not conducive for an archive.
Right.
A lot of stairs and a lot of small spaces. But this building, fully handicap accessible, we have a great display area for our exhibits. So we built it to suit, so to speak. And the town has been very supportive of our historical efforts here.
That's great. So you're at the point where you're like, we're never moving again.
At least as long as I'm historian, I'm never moving again, because this was the second time. I will say the second time was much easier than the first, because I had a lot of help and I understood what it entailed. The first time I was totally green. And things were sitting in boxes for a very long time. And this time we had everything numbered and cataloged, and a lot of volunteers who stepped up to help. So anybody who's moving an archive or anything, ask for help, because you can't do it by yourself. I learned that the first time around.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, well, let's talk about your job as the town historian, because honestly, it kind of sounds like one of those panel memes. Have you ever seen those? Where
Yes.
It's like, what my mother thinks I do, what my neighbors think I do, what I really do. So what do you really do?
What do I do? Well, first off, the New York State's actually unique. In each, back in 1919, as we were coming out of World War I, the state historian at the time, we had a state historian, but we didn't have local historians. And the state historian at that point was concerned, as we were coming out of World War I, Spanish flu, women's suffrage, all these things were happening around that time. It was a very active time, but particularly World War I and the service members coming back from overseas, as well as the home front folks, the Red Cross volunteers. And they were concerned that the stories, the history of each of these communities would be lost. So they figured out a system. It took them a while they wanted to record New York State histories and New York State's role in World War I. And at the beginning, it was going to be that the state historian was going to appoint somebody in each community to do that. And then that was cumbersome, obviously, and the state historian certainly can't do that for every community. So they developed a system of each mayor and town supervisor would appoint a historian in each community with the purpose of recording the history of World War I in their own communities. And then they would send that report into Albany, into New York's officials, and they would have this great report for New York State's role in World War I. Well, the law stayed on the books. And so now we have, by law, each community is to appoint a historian, village historian, town historian, county historian. Every municipal division has a historian. And some people, I get this lot, what do you do all day? You sit in your office reading books. First off, I'm part-time. And in many communities, you're going to find the historian maybe doesn't even have an office in the municipal center or the town hall. But each community has that person who is recording the heritage of the community, promoting the heritage of the community, maintaining the official archive, which is what we do here. And also in many communities, including East Aurora, the historian has a statutory legislative role in, we have a historic preservation commission, and any proposals that come before them, they send here for review. I don't necessarily have an opinion, but I do the research and give them the background about a particular property.
Interesting.
So there is an actual role beyond the genealogy and the books and the fun stuff. There's an actual role in if for instance they want to put up a gas station somewhere or modify a building, they will ask for a historical report. And with the archives we have here, I put that report out to them, and that's happened a lot. So there is an actual role. So the story with that is, and the lesson to be learned is that any community you are in New York State, if you have a question about history, if you're visiting or if you even live there, go to the town hall and ask for the historian. And we always joke, but it's true. If they say we don't have one, you give me a call or you give another historian a call and we'll make sure they get one. And we're government officials, so we take an oath of office, just like your town justices, your town board, your town supervisor. We take an oath of office, so that
let me interrupt you real quick.
Sure.
So you're appointed, though, but not elected.
Correct. So actually, that's an interesting point. I'm appointed by the supervisor and the mayor. And it's one of very few positions that are not appointed by the boards. So I'm appointed, and the reason I've been told for that is our code of ethics strongly suggests, and I certainly do it, is to stay out of local politics. So
Sure.
I'm not allowed to go to political fundraisers or things like that, because I think they want to keep the position nonpartisan for a variety of reasons. But also, even though the position is appointed by political folks, we try to stay out of that. And I've been in positions where I've had to give information that might not have been popular.
We'll get to that.
Want to hear, yes. And so that's, I think, another reason why they encourage us to stay out of the politics, which is I'll be honest, politics is very, very important to the local system, but I'm glad I don't have to be a part of it.
Right. I don't blame you one single bit. Yeah. When I was preparing for this interview and I was thinking about what I was going to ask you and what the town historian does, it made me think of things like my father was a park ranger, and people would say, oh, I wish I was a park ranger. Then I could just hike around in the woods all day. And my mother was a librarian, same thing. I wish I was a librarian. Then I could just sit around and read books all day. So,
well, and that's one of the efforts, and I appreciate interviews like this because we have an organization of historians on the statewide basis and the regional basis in Western New York. And one of our missions is to educate the public as to what the historian is and who the historian is and what the office is there for. Tax dollars are paying for this office, and you should use it as a resource. So that's one of the big things is to tell people, just like I did now, tell you what I do and that there's a purpose. Tourism is helped immensely. Your building stock, your housing stock in your community, and the property values are enhanced by history. And a lot of times we're in the debates about local developments or local politics. It's interesting because people will sometimes say, well, we've never done this before. And you're like, oh, no. You go back into the newspaper and you realize, oh, no, we've been here before. That debate about traffic on a certain road. Oh, go back to 1967. They were having the exact same debate. So it's great to have that person in each community that everybody can call on to help them find that information about a property, about a person, to help live in the present and plan for the future.
So on a day-to-day level, what does your job look like?
Sure. So I'm part-time. So this is not a full-time job. And I don't know of any community where there's a full-time historian, even on the county level in some places. But in Aurora, we're very lucky because the community is very historic. And one of the things that we have done is expanded the role of the historian in East Aurora. But what I do is it's hard to encapsulate. So some of it is I do interviews such as this. I go speak to school groups. Wherever I'm invited to go speak, I try to do that. Even the summer day camps at the parks for the kids, we do a program about the history of their park and show old pictures. But people will email and request information either about their homes or about somebody or any topic local here to East Aurora. A lot of times I'm referring people to other agencies. So for instance, East Aurora is the hub of sort of our region here. And sometimes someone will be asking about a house or an event in a nearby town. And I'll refer them to their town historian because their town has one, as all do. And then I've expanded a lot on social media. One of my thoughts was at the beginning, people, I think, going along the lines of what do you do? And sometimes people think you just sit here all day having fun. And one of the things about Facebook and Instagram, I think some people think it's just a lot of fun and it's sometimes a waste of time. I've heard that a couple times. And for me, and I think the community, Facebook and Instagram, none of these photographs and documents and anything we have here in the archives, it does any good sitting in a drawer. And so one of my goals has been to get that out there to the community, to see the resources that we have, the pictures of the photographs of people and places and houses, and put them. So every day I have a post that goes out on our social media, and I schedule that out ahead of time. So I'm not physically behind the computer each day. But that's been a huge thing that I don't know how we really lived without,
Yes.
And I also manage the archives, which is a big part of the job, and just making sure everything's cataloged where it should be, easily found. Grant writing is part of it to get grants for digitization of our files. We digitize the newspapers. And then working as a liaison with local historical organizations to keep everybody sort of on the same page. And if anybody needs any help with anything, your town historian essentially helps coordinate some of that. And lastly, we have a museum exhibit here at the town hall, and it's owned by the Historical Society, which is a separate organization. But here in East Aurora, because I'm here, I'm the curator of that. So I get to do a whole lot of different things.
Sure. I'm looking forward to seeing the museum after our conversation today, if you have time to walk around a little bit.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, one of my first connections to you, which you are unaware of or don't remember because it's been a long time, is I moved here 7 years ago and we ended up buying a house. And when we walked in to tour the house, there was a little packet of information there. And it had, who built the house, and it had the history of the house and how it was connected to other parts of the community. And we had decided to buy our house probably within, 5 minutes. We looked at houses and we just knew, we're like, this is the one. And so I got very spoiled because I thought, wow, look at here. I have a whole packet of information. So I didn't have to do any history research at all. You had done that. And I suppose you'd done that for a realtor. So is that something that comes up with realtors on occasion when you have a particular kind of house?
Occasionally. What happens more often is someone will move into a new house and because hopefully we're doing a good job getting the word out that we're available for that, and there's documents here that could help folks with the history of their home. They'll call and say, can you tell me anything about my house? The problem with that is it doesn't end. You are going to constantly be investigating, like genealogy. You're doing the genealogy of your home, essentially. And genealogy never ends. You can go back as far as you want in your family history, that as long as the documents are there. But also you can delve into details about all the folks in your family as deep as you want. I mean, there's always something new to find. Same with your house. So when folks say they come in and they think within a half an hour we're going to be able to have the entire history of their home, it unfortunately doesn't happen that way. And so my advice to folks is to make sure you're very patient, and this is supposed to be fun.
Right.
You're supposed to enjoy the process. So don't come in with the idea that, well, we're just going to grab whatever we can and go and have the history of my house. It's an ongoing process. But one of the things, and what you had was extremely rare, and I know you know that, is that people don't put together the history of their house. But it's fairly easy to do if you have what they call the search and title for your property. And it belongs to the property, not the house. That's one thing to remember. But when you close on a property in New York State, perhaps in other places, they want to guarantee that the property you're buying was legitimately sold all the way back. So going back to the late 1700s, early 1800s, your title search, which they do, lists every owner and every transaction dating back over 200 years in many cases. Now, legally, that's important because you want to guarantee that the property you're buying isn't going to have someone from 1850 showing up claiming it, claiming the property. But a secondary advantage of this document, the search and title, is that it lists all the previous owners and the exact dates of transaction, which is a great starting point. That's a goldmine of information because we can use the maps. We can go into the files and try to figure out who the owners were and maybe why they, when they built the houses, all that, sort of do a history genealogy of your house. But with the search and title, if I know that Mr. Smith bought your property on May 4th, 1862, I can go back into the newspaper on May 4th, 1862 and see if they mentioned anything.
Right.
Or we have family files that have, if we know who owned your property, we can cross-reference with the family files and figure out, maybe there's a picture of the house in the family file that wouldn't have necessarily been in a property file. So that search and title helps us cross-reference. It also gives you a clue as to the division of properties. So most of the time your property was part of a much bigger parcel. And in there, we'll tell you what was going on. So a lot of times people will call wanting us to help them with the history of their house, when in fact they already have most of the information in their hands or their attorney's hands.
Right. Well, nobody can see my face right now, but as you were saying this, I don't know if you could see my eyebrows were like going up, and I have practically light bulbs over my head because when at closing, we were given this giant document and it was given to us and it said basically never lose this.
Correct.
And
Copy it right away, honestly.
Yeah, those
People
were the
come
words.
in with their originals, and I think, no, put it back in your safe deposit box.
That's where mine is right now.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't make a copy, but I did get a safe deposit box right after, because that was the only thing that I didn't even bother to look at it. What I heard was, don't ever lose this.
Don't ever lose it. Yes. Well, when we received ours for our home, actually the attorney sent me the last page because they just wanted to prove that last person had the right to sell the house to us. So I immediately called up and I said, oh, I need the whole thing because I wanted to do this whole thing. And from that document, I found out, first of all, I was able to figure out who owned the house. And some legal challenges and things along the way. But I was able to cross-reference and find out that the woman who lived in my home was the principal at the high school. One of the things you do have to be careful about, some people don't want to know who died in their house, or if there was, like, for instance, there were at least 2 funerals in my parlor that I found out through the search and title and then cross-referencing to the obituaries we have here in the archives. Some people don't want to know that.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that, but just be forewarned that, and if you are going to a historian, if you have boundaries, put those out there right away, because folks like me like to we give it out no matter what. And sometimes we forget to be sensitive to some people who may not want that information.
I pretty much assume people died in my house, as old as it is. I mean, I didn't go so far as to find out, but I'm okay with that. And it's funny because I came from a different area of the United States, and that was a real kind of a hush-hush thing. Like if somebody died in the house, it was really hush-hush. And here we didn't even really delve into it, but I also just assumed that it was probably, my house is over 130 years old.
Yeah, and you definitely... So, for instance, the woman that I was referencing, she passed away in the house, and her obituary said, Mrs. So-and-so died at her home, gave the exact address. So there's no question.
Sure.
So then I start thinking, and you get these thoughts of, okay, but, then she had her wake, and her father also waked in the parlor, which is now what we call the living room. And we just, we know that, and thought, well, and then we thought, well, where would they have had the room to have all these people in here? But then, of course, they didn't have television in the way, all the big furniture.
Right.
But I connected to the person who lived in my house, which was really interesting because, it's an interesting connection because, I know how much I love my house, and I imagine that they loved it just as much. And it's just this person I never met, I'm connecting to by researching and remembering them, And so one of the things I started to do is to do a scrapbook of the house, so that, and my, whenever we have house guests over or people over for dinner or something, it's a real hit, frankly. People like to know that. And for my neighbors too, I gave them, because a lot of it was the same information because the lot used to be bigger, and it's a great gift. The neighbors loved having an old map of their property, so it just connects you to the folks who love the house just as much as you do today. And then sometimes you think, well, why did they make this decision about the house? And so you're it's a weird connection, but it's really neat to put things in perspective that, I sometimes get a little overwhelmed with house projects, but then I thought, well, I never had to build it.
Right.
Or all those things like that.
Right. Absolutely. And all of us, probably all of my listeners are obsessed with this kind of stuff. So we can listen to this all the time, but I found it so useful. I am aware of the original person who built my home and then how quickly it transferred to the next person. And I can see where changes were made in the house because I do spend a lot of time restoring and preserving the house that we live in, and I do most of that work myself. So I love that because I can I can guess when some of the things happened, and any changes that my house has had over time happened so long ago that it wouldn't, they didn't mess anything up, which is kind of amazing.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, I mess it up. I guess that was pretty judgmental, but I guess there was nothing that truly stuck out as this is not appropriate and does not belong in this house, except for maybe 1 or 2 things. For the most part, everything had been done so long ago, even though it wasn't original, it fit. It worked.
Well, and you answer questions too. Like, for instance, our lot, because we live in the village, and so they're village lots. They're not very big, but our lot is much wider than our neighbors. And there's always been a joke, because we have a lot more breathing room on either side of our house. But the reason is our lot, we were the original house. And then Mrs. Rosenkrantz was her name, actually.
That's a great
which is a great name. She sold off the lots. So we were part of a housing development. We were one of the first lots in that housing development. And she sold off the lots. Well, now it makes sense because she saved as much of the land as she wanted for herself. So knowing that, you know why certain things happen. And of course, there's other questions too, like why, they built garages over the property lines and stuff like that, that sometimes your search and title will answer when they talk about the division of the property. So take a peek at it because it's really a great document. And then sometimes you find out that people who owned your house or owned the land on it were pretty prominent in your community. And there's quite a bit of information about them that you can find out.
Well, on the way to copying my
yes
all of that paperwork, then yes, I'll pull it out of my safe deposit box. I'm going to pause for just a minute to let you know that today's episode of True Tales from Old Houses is supported by EcoStrip, the exclusive U.S. distributor of Speed Heater infrared paint removal products from Sweden. Used properly, the Speed Heater 1100 and the Cobra infrared paint removers reduce dust from paint scraping, and they don't release toxic lead fumes into the air. I reach for my Speed Heater Cobra all the time. Right now, I'm actually using it on a staircase project with lots of curves and crazy angles and right next to wallpaper, but it's no big deal. The Speed Heater heats the paint from the inside out and only where you point it. That means I aim it at the painted woodwork and it doesn't catch my wallpaper on fire, which I appreciate. I also use it a lot for window restoration, and it doesn't break the glass. Kind of amazing. I invested in the Cobra about 3 years ago or so, and it has really made this type of work so much easier. To find out more, visit EcoStrip. That's eco-strip.com. Order now and get $20 off your entire order when you use the coupon code TrueTales1. Squish all that together, the word true, then tales, and the number 1. That's $20 off your Speed Heater order with True Tales 1. Yeah, so let me ask you just a little bit of particular history about this town, because it's kind of neat. And I wanted to get into it just a little bit now that we know what you do daily and as a part of your job. So I actually asked some of my Instagram followers, I said, do you have any questions? What would you want to know from a town historian? And so one of the questions was, what would you consider the strangest event in town's history? And before you answer that, let me say, to your point before about not getting in the middle of everything, if I ask you a question and you're like, I can't answer that, just, we can.
That rarely happens. I just won't tell you.
Okay.
For instance, before I answer your question, like sometimes people will wonder, should a building be demolished? And I won't answer that question. I am not an architectural expert. What I will do is give the information to the folks who have to make that decision, because the history of that property is only a part of the decision making. There's, the condition of the safety of the property currently. So that's what I mean. I'm never going to come out, or rarely. I mean, I may, if it's a case that I really feel is important, will say, well, that building needs to stay, because I don't know all the other factors that go into that decision making. For instance, most recently, I wrote an article for the local paper. I do a monthly column, another part of my job, about for years, and this might be part of the strange history, to answer your question, for years, or at least as long as I can remember, there's been the story going around that as part of East Aurora's role on the Underground Railroad, there was a tunnel under East Main Street that went from the basement of one house to the basement of the other across the street. And it was sort of if you actually draw out the path from one house to the other, it's a pretty long diagonal route. Okay. It's not straight across the road. And I thought every time I heard this story, people were saying it as if it were definitely true. But when you actually ask, what's your evidence? Nobody seemed to be able to come up with any. But it's so intriguing because the Underground Railroad, number one, is intriguing because it was secret. Folks didn't talk about it. So evidence of it is not always out there in the forefront. But as I delved further into it, I found the only evidence of this secret tunnel under Main Street was weirdly shaped formations in the foundations of the two houses. And then I thought, okay, well, that might be true. But then I was reading experts, true experts on the Underground Railroad, national experts, who said, oh, this claim is being made all over the country, not just here in East Aurora. So as I delved more into it, there was no evidence. They actually ripped up Main Street at one point to reconstruct the street about 15 years ago.
Okay.
And my predecessor, the day they were ripping it up, he ran down there to see if there was ever any evidence of a tunnel, which I thought was a little overkill for it. But hey, that's our job. No evidence and no structural evidence. There would have probably had to have been some sort of structural. I've talked to a couple engineers and they're saying, yeah, a tunnel at basement level would have needed some sort of structural support. You don't just dig a hole underground. So one. Two, it didn't make sense the way that, as I studied more about the Underground Railroad, that didn't make sense. The Underground Railroad was more sophisticated than we give it credit. The conductors, as they called them on the Underground Railroad, knew exactly what they were doing. They knew their destination. People weren't just running through fields to freedom. These individuals who were seeking freedom were not running. So these claims of hiding places in houses and tunnels, most of them, unfortunately, as intriguing as they are not true. And that comes from national experts as well. But the thing that really stuck out to me was that they would have brought these individuals seeking freedom, probably hidden in a wagon, up what is today Route 16 here in East Aurora. And to believe that they would have dropped these folks off on the south side of Main Street and had them crawl under the street to get to the other house when they could have just taken the wagon to that second house to begin with. And that's what clinched it for me. And so I call it common sense history. And every time I give a presentation, I ask folks, you don't leave your common sense at the door. And so if something doesn't make sense, common sense, you got to use your gut sometimes. And to me, that didn't make any sense, that you would, have these folks crawling under Main Street, and structurally it didn't make any sense. And, you add that all up. So that's one of those weird stories that has just been allowed to, expand. And what I find interesting also is that we have a lot of history of abolition in East Aurora. We also have a lot of history on the other side as well, of racism, and the Ku Klux Klan was active in this area as well. But the abolition movement is documented. We had churches in our community that were putting out resolutions against slavery. So we don't really, we have that. You don't have to hang your hat on stories that can't be documented. So most times when people come and they claim their house was on the Underground Railroad, I'm a huge skeptic. I want to see evidence. Right. And one person in particular came in swearing up and down that their house was on the Underground Railroad and wouldn't hear otherwise. And I had to break the news that it was impossible because their house was built in 1895. Your house was not on the Underground Railroad, So, but people get passionate about history and these stories. So, but the stories in themselves are part of the history. Like that underground tunnel, it's part of our history, whether that tunnel existed or not. So,
interesting. I had not thought of it that way. That's a really interesting perspective on that, because I think where it's really easy for people to dismiss that kind of thing, as ridiculous. And yes, it ended up being false. However, like you said, so many people have said that. It's just like, talking about your favorite place to get ice cream in this town.
Absolutely,
or whatever, which there are so many places to get ice cream in this town, by the way.
There is. And local lore is important. There's actually, a lot of organizations, national organizations, that are not discounting the local lore, as long as you document it as such. We have a lot of stories like that, and we still tell the stories with the caveat that we don't have any proof or the proof is lacking. But the story is still, how did it become the story? How did that story evolve and become part of the local history? That's important too. And it just, the importance of documentation, it teaches us that as well, which goes back to your point about documenting your house history and leaving it for the next person. That's very important.
Well, you kind of segued before into something that I'd wanted to ask you anyway. And I was just going to say that, most of us recognize that we can't change history. However, over time, we often start to see events and public figures through a different lens. And I wondered from a professional standpoint how you handle that, because and this community is a really good example of that, of different types of history all located in one. And you talked about it, Ku Klux Klan,
Yep.
Good things, bad things.
So I think it's the approach. So that's been a big debate. For instance, you find a list of Ku Klux Klan members from your community. Do you release that list? Even though it was 1920s or earlier or even later, there could be family members still around. So what I do a presentation on the Underground Railroad, and I end toward the end of the presentation where, as much as East Aurora, likes to talk about our role in the abolition movement, which was pretty, given our geography, was pretty important. And plus it's well documented. But we can't forget that there were local businessmen, owners of shops on Main Street, who were going up to Williamsville for Ku Klux Klan meetings. And it was in the newspaper. These meetings were, the organization was not underground. They were having demonstrations at the corner of Transit and Main Street in Williamsville, which today we drive through. We don't even think about it, but that's where, and people from all these communities around there would go. And there was a list published by anti-Ku Klux Klan organization, got a hold of a list of people who signed into these meetings. Well, I don't think these people were ashamed of going to these meetings, frankly. And there were a couple meetings here in East Aurora. But that list we have, and it lists every person by town and their occupation. So what do you do with a list like that? So what I did, and it's available on the internet.
Okay.
Someone scanned it and put it online. So during a presentation, I put it up on the screen, but blurred out the names. And I told people where they could go see it. So my thought was, I didn't want, someone's great-grandchild finding out that their ancestor was a member of the Ku Klux Klan in the middle of the public library during the presentation. But they have a right and an obligation, frankly, to look back and see that. So I think that's an approach where we can, just a little thing you can do today to not forget that history, but also in a sensitive way, talk about it, remembering that. But history is history, and the good and the bad. Sometimes we like to put people on pedestals, and especially with people, and we forget they were human. And so we have to remember that. And I love some people love houses, and I want to know who lived inside. Mm-hmm. I love both, but I like to delve in. I want to know everything about somebody. I'll see a picture of somebody and it'll have their name on the back. And I just go back in the files and try to find out everything I can about that person. If it's a picture of them in high school, I want to know where, what did they do for a job later? How many kids did they have, and the mistakes they made. I mean, that's part of history. That's part of, and it makes us feel better too. Because sometimes I think when we idolize the folks from the past and the events of the past, we sort of bring ourselves down because we feel we're not living up to that. But when we realize that, they weren't perfect either, and not just on a national level, we like to talk about presidents and things like that, even our own relatives on the local level, it's very important to really see what they were dealing with, and their reaction to it, and answer why. Why did someone do what they did, or why did they think the way they did? Not just say, oh, they were racists and they were members of the Ku Klux Klan. No, why did a group of people from East Aurora feel this way? What led them to feel this way? Because then maybe if we know that, we can correct it.
Sure. Sure. Absolutely. Well, you strike me as just the right person for this kind of job, because you're welcome. Hearing you describe that and the sensitive way that you approach that, not wanting someone to find out in the middle of a presentation, that just, that kind of hit me right in the heart. But, but I wanted to ask you, and maybe this is related to that what skill or personality trait do you think has become the most useful in your job? Not necessarily education related, but, sure. What do you draw upon regularly?
Patience.
Okay.
Patience is a big, and one of my helpers here, she's a wonderful. She comes in every week to volunteer. She's 96 years old, and she comes in every week like it's her job. And I really appreciate that. But she gave me the biggest compliment the one day. She had said, "You are so patient with the people who come in." And I never even thought of it that way. I never thought of that as a skill until she told me, because people come in and a lot of times they just have, I take for granted I know how to find all this information. And some people just don't know the first thing where to start. And a lot of times it'll be information that you can find on the internet, and I'm just helping you get there and having patience to work people through. And I don't want to judge people, because there are older people who are whizzes on the internet. But frankly, if the internet is new to you, you have not grown up with the internet, or the computers, or digitizing documents and how to search those digitized documents. It takes patience to walk people through that. But also in return, I need patience, because a lot of times folks will email with a question, and then I sense that they want the answer pretty fast. And I said, no, research takes time. And even our local officials, sometimes they'll be like, well, we need the history of this property. Can we have it by next week? No, not everything's on the internet. Not everything's digitized. And sometimes it takes old fashioned digging through the files and investigative work. And that takes time. So patience all around, I think, is a big asset for anybody, not just my job, but anybody who's doing research projects. You just really need to keep that in mind as you go into it.
All right. Well, as we start to wrap up here, I have one more question, and then a couple more things. The last question I would just ask you, and I could maybe guess after talking to you for this long, is what do you enjoy the most about your job?
People. I enjoy the people who, it's so funny, because some days I'll feel like I have a plan, and then someone will email or call with a question, and it takes me on a whole different discovery of something in our past. And I'll delve into that. But also, and it sounds strange, but so I deal with a lot of dead people in this job. And it sounds weird, but sometimes I feel like I've connected with these people. And occasionally I'll put like a quote down from somebody who said something, years ago. For instance, there was a woman, Mrs. Persons, who in 1941 was interviewed for the paper, and she was in her 90s at the time, I believe. And she was she was criticizing the young people. The skirts were too short, ankles were showing, kids were spoiled. The radio was going to cause all sorts of problems for the youth of the day. They were disrespectful, and she just didn't know what she was going to do with these kids today. 1941. She was talking about the greatest generation. If you think about it, this is the group that went to war and World War II. So that put it in perspective for me that, sometimes when we hear about young people being lazy or not wanting to work, I hear this all the time. The kids are spoiled today. They just sit on watching TV or on their phones all day, and they don't appreciate work. And I think I throw that right out the window. Every generation complains about the next, or part of that generation complains about the next. And every generation has a group of people that may not, it's the same. Yeah, we have different technology. And I always laugh at adults who criticize kids who are not motivated while they're sitting on their cell phone saying it.
Right.
We can all learn from that. But Mrs. Persons, for instance, I connected with her because she was saying this, and it really put today in perspective for me. I never met her in the flesh, but I feel like I've gotten to know her. And the same with anybody you look around town, your street names, and go into the obituaries of the old papers, because the people who, your mayors, your town supervisors, your big business owners, they're only a part of it. It's the folks who actually
the day-to-day
made everything work in your community. And that takes a little digging,
Right.
But that's the best part, is to learn more about people, because this town, any town, didn't just drop out of the sky. People along the way built it, made decisions, argued, debated, to create what your community is today.
All right. So let's tell my listeners where they can find your social media accounts, because maybe they'll want to find out the daily picture.
We're both on Facebook and Instagram as Aurora Town Historian.
Aurora Town Historian.
Aurora Town Historian. And our website, it's townaurora.com, and you have to go through the departments a little bit. So what the resources are available. And I also have a couple other resources outside of our office here. I don't pretend that we can help you with everything. And as a matter of fact, there's a lot of resources nationally, statewide, in the community that we can help direct you to.
Okay, great. And I'll link all of that in the show notes so people can find it later too. So anyway, thank you. This was such a pleasure today.
Thank you.
Really loved every second of it. It's fun to get to know you better. And I think I said all that in the beginning, and I usually... Again, I mean, it thrills me to get to sit down with someone and talk, especially when they're passionate about the subject. And I think it's really going to translate well to listeners. They're going to love it too.
Well, thank you for inviting me to chat about this. This is great. I don't get to talk about my job too much.
You just quietly are in there doing your job, right? All right. Well, thank you for listening to today's episode on location in one of the most adorable little towns I've ever seen, East Aurora, New York. Be sure to follow True Tales from Old Houses and Blake Hill House on Facebook and Instagram. And for more information about this episode, including show notes, transcripts, merchandise, and to sign up for the monthly newsletter, visit truetalesfromoldhouses.com. Until next time.